The ground had no idea what water even was anymore. 100 days with no rain had made the dirt more like hard bones than soft earth. Silas Everhart was right by his totally empty water barrel, looking hard at the rusty bottom where all that was left was dry mud and thoughts of nicer days. He had just 2 canteens still, 2 metal bottles that could hold about 3 days of staying alive, if he was super careful and didn't walk around a lot. But this cowboy knew what the desert always showed real clear. You can't make deals with being thirsty. You got water or you got a hole in the ground? The early sun came up over the hill like it was mad at everybody. Silas rubbed his split lips with his hand back, tasted blood, and looked over at the fence where his final 5 cows had fallen over 2 days back. He didn't try to bury them. The dirt was way too tough, and he was way too weak. The dirt would grab them back soon enough, like it grabbed all the other stuff. His hands were shaking when he picked up one of the canteens from the table in his little house. The heaviness felt super heavy and not heavy enough at all. 3 years back, his wife Martha had passed away in the bedroom right past the kitchen, and he'd stuck around because going away felt like ditching her memory. Now he wondered if sticking around was the slowest way to join her. He twisted off the cap on the canteen and let himself have 3 tiny drinks. The water was kinda hot, tasted like metal, but it was staying alive. He put the cap back on and put it down with the same gentleness a guy might use for something holy. Because out here, in a place that had gone mean, water was the only thing worth believing in. Silas stepped outside, his boots making crunch sounds on dirt so dry it was like stepping on glass breaking. The sky went on forever and mean up above him, not one cloud to give any hope. He'd been on this ranch for 42 years, seen his wife's garden get flowers every spring, raised cows that used to be hundreds, made a whole life from just hard work and not giving up. Now he saw it all going away, bit by bit, while he counted his last days and last bits of water. The wind brought dust and hot air. Nothing more. No birds singing, no grass moving. Even the bugs had ditched this spot. Silas rested against the fence post. The wood so dry it felt like it could break if he leaned too hard and looked out at the far edge where the ground mixed into sky. He thought about the letters he'd never sent to his brother over in the east, the grandkids he'd never see, the way that when he died out here it could be weeks before somebody found him. But what grabbed his eye wasn't the dead-looking place all around him. It was something moving by the south fence. Something down low. Something that shouldn't be around. Silas narrowed his eyes against the bright sun, his heart beating faster even though he was so tired. Something was on the ground about 50 yards away, kinda hidden by the shadow of a scruffy bush that had somehow not died. He grabbed the second canteen from inside. He wasn't sure why and started heading toward whatever had fallen on his land. Each step felt like it took stuff he couldn't spare. As he got nearer, his breath stopped in his chest. It wasn't some animal. It was a girl. And from how she had on clothes, from the long dark hair all around her head like a dark circle on the light dirt, he knew just what she was. An Apache kid, maybe 10 or 12 years old, and she wasn't moving. Silas got down on his knees next to the girl, his knees complaining about the quick drop. Her skin was like copper left out in the sun too long, lips split and bleeding, chest going up and down in short, needy breaths. He put 2 fingers on her neck and felt a heartbeat, weak, not steady, but there she was alive, just barely. Dust was all over her clothes and her hair had dry sticks tangled in. She'd been walking forever. Probably got lost from her folks in one of the dust storms that had been blowing through the area for weeks. Her hands were scratched bad, fingernails snapped. She'd been crawling before she fell over. Silas looked back at his little house, then down at the girl, then at the canteen he was holding. The math for staying alive ran in his head with mean clearness. He had maybe 72 hours to live with 2 canteens. The girl needed water right now or she'd be gone by dark. If he gave her 1 canteen, he'd have 36 hours, maybe less if the hot kept getting worse. His wife's words came back in his head. Something she'd said years back when he'd said no to helping a wanderer who'd shown up half-hungry at their door. The real test of a guy isn't what he does when it costs him nothing. It's what he does when it costs him everything. He thought that was silly back then. Out here, nice thoughts got you dead. But Martha had pushed and they'd fed the wanderer, and the guy had gone on and nothing bad had happened. Nothing good either, just another day and a bunch of days. But this wasn't about big ideas or old times. This was about a kid dying right there while he had the stuff to stop it. He twisted off the first canteen, the one he'd already sipped from, and tilted it to the girl's mouth. Her lips were so dry they were stuck together. He used his thumb to pull them apart gently, like he'd done once for baby cows that couldn't figure out how to drink. Water hit her tongue and her eyes popped open, dark brown, big with scare and mix-up. She choked, tried to back off, but Silas kept the canteen still. Easy. You need this. She didn't know English, but his voice must have meant something because she quit fighting and drank. Not chugging, not crazy, just steady drinks that showed him she'd felt real thirsty before. When half the canteen was gone, Silas took it back. She reached for it, fingers grabbing at nothing, but he shook his head. That's all for now. Too much will make you sick. He helped her sit up. She wobbled. Would have fallen if he hadn't grabbed her shoulder. Her eyes stuck on the canteen he was holding, then went to his face, then back to the canteen. There was something in that look. He knew the desperate thinking of somebody figuring their chances to stay alive. She tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't work. Silas grabbed her again, felt how light she was, nothing but bones and not giving up. He looked at the little house, then at the sun going higher, then at the half-empty canteen. The girl needed more water, needed a shady spot, needed help he wasn't sure he had the power to give. But the bigger mess was simple and awful. Half a canteen wasn't gonna save her. She was too bad off. He'd need to give her more. Maybe all of what was left in the first canteen. And then there would only be one left. One canteen for one guy in a place that showed no nice to anybody. The girl's hand grabbed weakly around his wrist, and she looked at him with eyes that held no hope for nice stuff. She'd already okayed dying. He could see it in how she held herself, the giving up of somebody too young to have learned it. Silas got up, pulling her up with him. She weighed almost nothing. He started heading back to the little house, the girl leaning hard against his side, each step needing more try than the last. The canteen hung from his other hand, half full of water that was supposed to keep him alive. He didn't let himself think about what happened after she got better enough to walk. Didn't let himself think about the tribe that would come looking for her. Didn't let himself think about anything except the shady little house and the other canteen waiting on the table. One canteen left and a choice that hadn't even finished showing itself yet. Inside the little house, Silas set the girl down on the floor by the wall where the shade was deepest. She slumped against the old wood, eyes half shut, breathing still short. He put the half-empty canteen on the table next to the full one and stood there looking at both of them like they were judges ready to say a punishment. The girl made a sound, hardly more than a whisper. When he looked at her, she was pointing at the canteens with a shaking hand. Her meaning was clear enough. More. She needed more. Silas picked up the half-empty canteen and brought it to her. She drank the rest in long, steady drinks, and when it was empty, she looked at him again. Still thirsty, still dying, just slower now. He knew the signs. He'd seen cows die of thirst, watched guys stumble into town barely alive after getting lost in the area. The body needed time to take in water, needed rest, needed more than what he'd given her. Half a canteen would keep her breathing for a few more hours, maybe through the night if she was tough. But by morning, without more water, she'd be right back where he found her. The second canteen sat on the table like a blame, full, heavy, his last shot at living long enough to see rain, if rain ever came again. He'd been careful with it for weeks, watching his stuff shrink from barrels to buckets to this one metal bottle that held maybe 36 hours of being around. Martha's grave was out back, marked by rocks he'd carried from the creek bed before it went dry. He'd sat by it for hours after she died, asking stuff that had no answers. One of those stuff had been whether he'd have the guts to join her when his time came, or whether he'd fight like a trapped animal to get every last day of life. Now he knew the answer. Silas picked up the second canteen, twisted off the cap, and got down beside the girl. Her eyes got big when she saw what he was holding. She shook her head, tried to push his hand away, but she didn't have the power. She got what this meant. Somehow, despite not speaking the same, despite being a kid, she got he was picking her life over his own. "Drink," he said, and held the canteen to her lips. She drank, not as crazy this time, but with something that looked like tears mixing with the water going down her chin. When she'd taken enough that her breathing got steady, when color started coming back to her face, Silas put the cap on the canteen and set it aside. Maybe a quarter of it was left, enough for one more day if he was careful. If he didn't move much, if the hot didn't get worse. The girl's hand found his, her fingers wrapping around his palm. She looked at him with eyes that held something more than thanks. Knowing maybe, or the kind of that couldn't be said in words. She had a small necklace made of beads and animal bones. With shaking hands, she took it off and pushed it into his palm, closing his fingers around it. He tried to give it back, but she wouldn't take it. She held his fist shut around the necklace and nodded once, strong and sure. Whatever this meant in her world, it was big. They sat like that until the worst hot of the day went by. Until her breathing got back to something close to normal, until her eyes got clear enough that he could see smart and awake behind them. She was gonna live for now. As evening came and the hot finally went below too much, the girl got up. Her legs held this time. She looked at Silas, then at the door, then back at Silas. She pointed to the far edge to the south, where the bad lands went for miles. "Your folks," he said, knowing she couldn't get it, but needing to say it anyway. "You need to find your folks." She nodded. She got that much at least. She took one step toward the door, then turned back and touched her hand to her heart, then pointed at him. Whatever words her folks spoke, that move needed no explaining. Then she walked out of the little house and into the evening hot. Silas watched from the doorway as she went across his land, stronger now, but still wobbly, going toward the south hill. He watched until she went over the top, taken by the place that had nearly got her. When she was gone, he went back inside and looked at the quarter canteen of water on his table. He'd saved her life and signed his own end paper. The math was simple and done. He had maybe one day left, maybe less. Silas sat at his table as dark filled the little house, the quarter canteen in front of him, catching what little moonlight came through the window. He'd let himself have 3 tiny sips through the evening. Each one felt like taking time he didn't own. The water was kinda hot, tasted like metal, but it kept his throat from shutting all the way. His hands shook when he picked up the canteen. Not from scare exactly, but from the body's knowing that it was closing down. He'd seen this before in animals. The shakes that came when the body got what the head was trying to say no to. He was dying. Not tomorrow or the next day. The stuff had already begun. Cells yelling for wet that wouldn't come. He thought about writing letters, but his hand hurt too bad to hold a pen. Thought about going to Martha's grave, but wasn't sure he'd have the power to go back. So he sat in the chair he'd made 30 years back and watched shadows go across walls he'd put up with his own hands. The necklace the girl had given him was on the table by the canteen. Animal bones and colored beads on what looked like horsehair. He picked it up, felt how heavy it was, wondered what it meant in her world. A promise, maybe a sign of or just the only thing she had to give. It didn't matter now. She was gone. Hopefully found by her folks. Hopefully alive. That was enough. It had to be enough. The night got colder, which was nice in a way. Hot killed quicker than cold. Silas wrapped himself in a blanket that smelled like dust and old, and shut his eyes. Sleep wouldn't come easy. The body fought too hard when it was dying. But being so tired was its own kind of heavy. He went in and out of being awake. Never all asleep, but never all awake either. Dreams mixed with old times, mixed with fake stuff from no water. He saw Martha in the kitchen, young again, laughing at something he'd said. Saw the ranch like it was 20 years back, green and alive. Cows going across hills thick with grass. saw water running in the creek, heard it bubbling over rocks that were now just hard mud. When the dreams got bad, when he saw the empty barrels and dead animals and land going to dust, he made his eyes open. The little house was still there, still real, still his end spot. The quarter canteen seemed less heavy than before. He picked it up, shook it soft, heard the water move. Maybe a few more hours of wet, maybe enough to see one more sun up. That felt big somehow. To see the sun come up one last time over land he'd loved and hated the same. He twisted off the cap on the canteen and let himself have another tiny sip. The water barely got his mouth wet. His tongue was big, lips split so bad they bled when he moved them. He put the cap back on and set it down with the care of somebody holding something holy. Then he shut his eyes and waited for morning or for whatever came after living. When living finally ran out of reasons to keep going, the hours went like rocks dropping through mud. Slow, heavy, no stopping. Sometimes he woke quick at sounds that weren't there. Sometimes he felt Martha's hand on his shoulder, turned to look, found only empty air. The body did tricks when it was dying. The head made up nice where none was. But as the dark started to get thin at the edges, as the first gray light of morning came through the window, Silas heard something that wasn't made up. Something real and can't be and scary altogether. Horses, lots of them, maybe more. The sound of feet on hard dirt getting closer, coming from the south where the girl had gone hours before. His eyes opened. His heart, weak and hard, suddenly found reason to beat quicker. He tried to get up, but his legs wouldn't work. He grabbed the table edge and pulled himself up, the room going round, and stumbled to the window. What he saw in the before-sun light made his breath stop in his chest. They were all over. Riders covered the hills like shadows made real. Not lots, hundreds. They were on the hills to the east and west, filled the low spot to the south, their horses standing still in the gray morning light. Apache fighters. Every one of them sitting in perfect quiet like they'd been cut from the same rock as the land itself. Silas grabbed the window edge to not fall. His head tried to get what his eyes were seeing. 300 people, maybe more, set up in a huge circle with his little house in the middle. They weren't moving, weren't talking, just watching with a calm that felt older than the area itself. Scare went through him like cold water. He'd heard stories his whole life. Folks killed, ranches burned, whole families gone in one night. The Apache were tough when they had to be, guarding their land. No forgive for stepping wrong. And he'd taken one of their kids, fed her, sent her back. But maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe they'd come for pay of a different kind. He looked at the quarter canteen on the table, at the necklace by it, at his gun leaning on the wall. The gun was no use. Even if he had the power to pick it up, even if he could shoot it, what would one shot do against 300 fighters? He'd die either way. The only question was whether it would be from thirst or from something quicker. The sun came over the east hill, coloring the riders in shades of copper and gold. Silas could see them clear now. Guys of different ages, some young and thin, others bigger with the look of knowing stuff. They had on usual clothes, carried weapons, sat their horses with the ease of folks born to the saddle. Not one looked mean. Not one looked nice either. They just looked there, like parts of nature waiting to see which way the wind would go. Silas made himself move from the window. If they wanted him gone, hiding inside wouldn't change it. If they wanted something else, answers, payback, fair for whatever they thought he'd done, then facing them like a scared guy wouldn't help. He picked up the necklace the girl had given him, hung it around his neck, and tucked it inside his shirt. Maybe it would mean something to them. Maybe they'd get he'd tried to help, or maybe they'd see it as taking one more bad added to whatever list they were keeping. His legs hardly held him as he went to the door. Each step took something he didn't have to give, but he kept going. He pushed the door open and stepped into the morning light, narrowing eyes against the bright, his body swaying like grass in wind. The riders stayed still. Hundreds of eyes on him, sizing him, judging something he couldn't say. The quiet was total. No horse steps, no voices, not even the sound of leather making noise, just still so full it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Silas took 3 steps from his porch before his legs quit. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, too weak to stand, too hard-headed to lie down all the way. He lifted his head and looked at the closest riders, maybe 30 yards away. One of them, a guy older than the others with gray in his hair, pushed his horse forward. The horse walked slow, on purpose, getting closer between them. The rider's face was beat up by weather, marked by sun and wind and years of living in land that asked for everything. His eyes were dark and hard to read. When he was close enough that Silas could hear the horse breathing, the guy stopped. He looked down at Silas for a long time. Then his look went to the little house behind him, to the land going dead and broken in every way, to the empty water barrels you could see by the side of the house. His eyes came back to Silas, and something changed in his face. Knowing maybe or getting it or decide finally made. The guy got off in one smooth move and walked up until he stood right in front of Silas. He was tall, big-shouldered, carried himself with boss that needed no saying. He reached into a bag at his belt and pulled something out. A small piece of beaded necklace. The same pattern as the one the girl had given Silas. The same. Colors, the same look. The guy held it up so Silas could see it clear. Then he pointed at Silas at the necklace hidden under his shirt and nodded once. He knew he got it. And whatever was about to happen next, it started with that getting it. The Apache boss got down in the dirt beside Silas, bringing himself to eye level. Up close, Silas could see the lines cut deep in the guy's face, the scar along his jaw, the smart behind eyes that had seen more than most guys would in 3 lives. This wasn't somebody who did stuff without thinking. This was somebody who checked every choice against stuff that went far beyond the now. The guy reached forward slow, giving Silas time to back if he wanted. When Silas didn't move, the boss's hand went to the necklace around Silas's neck, pulling it out from under his shirt. He held it careful, looking at the pattern of beads and bones, then looked back at his own piece. His thumb followed the design with something that looked like respect. Then he did something Silas didn't think. He smiled. Not big, not with teeth, just a little bend at his mouth corner that meant more than any words could. He pressed his hand to his own chest, over his heart, then moved to Silas, then pointed south toward where the girl had walked the night before. The meaning was clear enough. The girl had made it home. She'd stayed alive. And this guy, probably her dad, judging by how he held that necklace, knew just who did it. 2 other riders got off and came up carrying something between them. A water bag, big and heavy, still dripping from the outside like it had been dunked lately. They set it down in front of Silas with the kind of care saved for something special. The boss opened it, tilted it toward Silas's face. Water. Fresh water, cold water that smelled like rock and dirt, and all the good that had been gone from this land for 100 days. Silas's hand shook as he reached for it. The boss helped guide it to his lips, and when the first drops hit Silas's tongue, his body almost shook from the surprise of it. He drank slow, making himself not chug, knowing too much too quick would make him sick. The water was clean and fresh and tasted like being alive. When he drank enough that his throat didn't feel like split leather, the boss pulled the water bag back and capped it. He said something in his own words, his voice like making a big say. The other riders answered together, a single word that went across the low spot. The boss got up and moved his hand toward the hills where hundreds of his folks sat watching. He made a big sweep that included the land, the little house, the empty barrels, all Silas had. Then he pointed at the ground near the house and made a digging move with his hands. Silas's foggy head tried to get it. They were going to dig here, why? But the boss wasn't done. He called out something sharp and bossy. Right away, riders started getting off. Not just a few, not lots, all of them. The whole circle of fighters swung down from their horses in together move. And suddenly, the land that had been so dead quiet was filled with the sound of moving and reason. They pulled tools from their horse bags, digging stuff made from wood and bone and rock. Simple but worked. They got themselves set without talking much, making groups that moved with the quick of folks who'd done stuff together before. Some went toward a spot about 20 yards from Silas's little house. Others started clearing sticks and rocks. Still others made lines to pass stuff. The boss got down again beside Silas, this time drawing in the dirt with his finger. He made a circle, then drew lines going down from it. He pointed at the drawing, then at the spot where his folks were getting, then made the digging move again. Getting it hit Silas like cold water. They weren't here for payback. They weren't here to take anything. They were here to give something back. Something that matched what he'd given the girl. Water for water. Life for life. The boss saw knowing in Silas's face and nodded. He spoke again. His words heavy, even though Silas couldn't get them. But voice showed meaning. This was about honor, about about the kind of even that was beyond words or ways or the walls people made between each other. The boss got up and joined his folks at the digging spot. Within minutes, they'd started digging the dirt with a spot on that showed knowing Silas didn't have. They knew something about this land that he'd missed in 42 years of being here. They knew where the water was hiding, and they'd come to help him find it. Silas watched from the shade of his porch as 300 people changed his land. They worked in switching groups, some digging while others took breaks, then changing places with a beat that never slowed. The sound of tools hitting dirt became always almost like music, a beat that filled the morning air. He tried to get up and help, but the boss had gently pushed him back to sitting, pushing the water bag into his hands. Drink, rest, watch. The message was clear. This wasn't his job to do. This was theirs. The hole got deeper as the sun went higher. They'd started with a wide circle, maybe 8 FT across, and dug straight down with a spot on that amazed him. They didn't just toss dirt anyway. They set it into careful piles, splitting different kinds of dirt, making a way Silas didn't get, but clearly had reason. Every hour, somebody would lower a guy into the hole on a rope to keep digging, while others pulled up baskets of dirt hand over hand. The together was perfect. Not a single bit wasted, not a single person doing nothing. Even the kids who'd come with the grown-ups had jobs, carrying water to the workers, taking care of horses, setting tools. By mid-morning, they dug past the dry-top dirt into layers that showed a bit darker earth. Silas knew what that meant. They were getting closer to where wet might be, down where the sun couldn't bake all to dust. They were going to depths he'd never had the stuff or knowing to reach. The boss showed up beside Silas, giving him dried meat and more water. Silas took both, his body yelling for food it hadn't got in days. As he ate, the boss pointed at the digging spot and spoke in his words, his voice like teaching, like he was telling something big. A younger fighter came up and spoke to Silas in rough English. Grandfather says, Earth remembers water deep, very deep. Your people dig wide. We dig deep. Silas got it. He'd been looking for water sideways, following creek beds, thinking it would flow where it always did. They were looking up and down, going down to water spots that were under the no rain, under the top mess to water that had been there long before the dry times and would stay long after. The young fighter kept saying as the boss spoke, Grandfather says daughter told us. Old man gave last water. Last water is holy. Holy water needs holy answer. The boss put his hand on Silas's shoulder, squeezed once, then went back to watching the work. The digging kept on without stop. 12 FT deep, 15 FT, 20 FT. The hole got so deep they had to make a wood frame to hold the sides, making it from dead trees they pulled from around the land. Then just past noon, a yell went up from the diggers. The sound went across the low spot, picked up by other voices until it became a wave of happy. Workers got around the hole's edge. The guy at the bottom called up, his voice quick. They'd found mud, real mud, wet mud, which meant water was close. The digging got stronger. More workers switched in. The baskets coming up now carried earth that was damp, then wet, then sloppy with wet. Silas got up, despite his weak, walked toward the hole with legs that barely held him, and looked down into dark that went deeper than he'd ever thought. At the bottom, maybe 25 FT down, he could see it. Water. Not much yet, just a dark pool starting at the base of the hole. But it was there, real there. Proof that under all this dead, life still was if you knew where to look. The workers didn't stop. They built a rock lining along the hole's walls to stop fall in, setting rocks with the care of folks making something meant to last forever. They made a wood frame at the top, strong and steady, made to hold a rope and bucket way. By late afternoon, the pool at the bottom had got to nearly 2 FT deep. By evening, it was 4 FT and still going up. The water spot they hit was feeding the well steady, water coming through the walls and getting in a hold that would never go dry as long as the earth below had water to give. They'd made a well, a real working forever well in one day with nothing but hand tools and knowing and 300 people working as one. The boss stood beside Silas as sundown colored the sky in orange and red. He lowered a bucket into the well, pulled it up full, and gave it to Silas. Water, clear and cold and never-ending. Silas drank from the bucket until his body remembered what it felt like to be normal again. The water was cold and clean, tasting of rock and dirt and something old that had nothing to do with the no rain above. He drank until his belly said stop, then sat back against the well's wood frame and felt tears make lines through the dust on his face. The Apache boss watched him for a bit, then nodded like, okay. He called out stuff to his folks, and they started getting ready to go. Tools were picked up and tied. Horses were set. But before they went, several fighters came up carrying wraps in leather. They set them near the well. The young Say guy showed up again. Grandfather says, gifts for keeping the well, for getting what was given. Silas opened the wraps with shaking hands. Inside he found rope, strong and good made, a bucket better than the one he'd had, rock tools for clearing junk from the well, leather bags filled with seeds, veggies, and grains that could grow in tough spots. They'd thought of all he'd need, not just to stay alive, but to make again. The girl showed from among the bunch of folks getting to leave. She looked okay now, her eyes shiny, her moves full of the jump kids have when they aren't dying of thirst. She went straight to Silas and put her arms around his neck, holding tight enough that he felt the shake going through her small body. When she pulled back, her dad stood by her. The boss put his hand on his daughter's head, then on Silas's shoulder. He spoke in his words, his voice going across the group. The young Say guy gave the words, Grandfather says, you gave water when you had none to give. You chose her life over your own. This is the greatest gift one person can give another. We return the gift in the only way that honors what you did. With water that will never run dry, with life that continues long after we leave. The boss reached into his shirt and pulled out something small, another piece of the beaded necklace. This one showing a different pattern. He pushed it into Silas's hand and closed his fingers around it. Grandfather says, you are family now. This land is guarded. If you need help, send word. We will come. Then the boss got on his horse. His daughter was lifted up to ride with him, sitting in front of her dad, with the ease of somebody who'd done that trip lots of times. She waved at Silas, her smile bright enough to match the sun. The Apache folks got on their horses in the same together quiet they'd come with. They made lines that went across the land, and when the boss raised his hand, they started to go. Not fast, not slow, just steady, with reason, going back toward the south areas where they belonged. Silas stood by his new well and watched them go. 300 people who'd gone miles to pay back an owe that most would have thought already done. 300 people who'd worked a whole day under mean sun to dig deep enough to find water that would save a guy they didn't know. As the last rider went over the south hill, Silas turned back to his well. He lowered the bucket again, pulled up more water, and carried it to the spot where Martha's garden had once done good. He poured it onto the split dirt, watched it soak in, make the soil dark. Then he went back for more and more and more. By evening, he'd watered the whole garden spot. By the next morning, he'd filled every barrel and holder on his place. By the end of the week, the dirt around his little house had started to get soft. Seeds he'd put began to come up. Tiny green bits pushing through dirt that had been called dead. The land began to fix. Not quick, not big show, but real and steady and forever. Silas worked his ranch through that time and the next. When rain finally came back to the area months later, his well kept flowing. The water spot the Apache had found ran deep and true, not touched by top stuff, giving water through dry times and wet times the same. He made his cows again, put garden back, fixed fences and stuff that had started to fall. The ranch that had been dying became alive again, kept by water that flowed from a well made by 300 hands in one day. Years later, when folks going by asked for water, Silas never said no. He'd fill their canteens, give what they needed, and send them on with enough to get to the next town safe. When they asked why he was so giving, he'd touch the beaded necklace he still wore and tell them a simple truth. Water given free comes back 100 times. Nice shown to one person goes across times. And some owes are paid not with cash or words, but with the kind of gift that saves lives long after the giver has gone. The well still flows. The land still lives. And Silas Everhart, the old cowboy who gave his last water to a dying kid, never went thirsty again. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another tale from the frontier, where courage and compassion reshape destinies in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe, and consider leaving a super chat to help us bring you more stories like this one. Your support means